You're listening to Actors with Issues with Juanialo, a podcast of actors, by actors, and for actors. Today, we are joined by Canadian actor Graham Parkhurst, star of the romantic comedy series Glamorous, streaming now on Netflix. This interview was recorded on June 22nd, prior to the SAG-AFTRA strike. Graham Parkhurst, thank you so much for being on Actors with Issues. Welcome.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
So as of recording this episode, today is premiere day. So how are you feeling? Are you nervous, excited, a bit of both?
It's the most overwhelming thing because I have people texting me, I have people sending videos. Instagram is just like blown up, right? And I'm not a huge social media guy, so I'm finally like learning how to go through all these messages, and it's overwhelming, but it's been very positive, which is great.
Yeah. So, looking through your list of credits, you have done quite a bit of sci-fi and comic book world stuff. So between Umbrella Academy, Supergirl, Titans, and Star Trek. So did you grow up loving sci-fi, or was that something that sort of came a little bit later for you, or was tackling that genre a whole new experience?
Well, sci-fi was always on in my family home, so it's Star Trek, all that stuff. I never watched it that much, to be completely honest. It was just there's tons of that films up here in Canada, whether it be Vancouver or Toronto. So because of the amount that films up here, you kind of like every actor here has like a list of sci-fi on their resume. But I will say, I started watching a lot more of it after being on projects like that because it's really amazing shows. Like Umbrella Academy, that's crazy, you know.
Right.
So like watching it and then being in it, you're like, this is insane. Like, this is so cool.
So, of course, I failed to mention what premiere we were talking about, but it's with Glamorous that's now on Netflix. And, with that whole experience, was it sort of the typical self-tape callback experience for the audition, or did you find that it was a little bit different this time around?
This time it was the exact same. Actually, I have a really funny story,
Mm.
hopefully appropriate. But so I only had about I had to jump on a train, and then I got this email and this character Parker, and then I read the description. I was like, oh, it's like some perfect gay cis white man. I was like, but I don't think I fit this, right? So I was like, whatever, I'm not going to do it. So I canceled. But then a friend of mine called me and was like, I think you should submit. And so I literally did it within like 30, 40 minutes, had it like completely filmed, completely edited, sent in. It was just like, and I never thought about it again. I was like, oh yeah, this casting director will never bring me back. But yeah, and then I got the call back while I was actually in Italy, and I was like shocked because I was like, really? So and then it was actually my first like screen test. Like I guess it was over Zoom, but we did a screen test for it.
Mm.
It was the first time I ever did one of those. So for me, it's like this whole thing has been a new experience because usually I just because there's smaller roles that I've done generally, you just get booked off of the one self tape, right? So yeah, this whole thing was like being shot out of a cannon, but we won, so it's good.
Yeah. And it's interesting, you said that you never really thought about it again after you first submitted it, which is something that lots of guests have talked about, is having that, they always tell young actors like just audition, send it, and forget about it, which
Yeah.
of course it's easier said than done. I'm sure you have found that.
Oh
It's
yeah.
like
Yeah.
you put all this pressure on particular roles, but with this role, did you sort of, because you didn't put that pressure on yourself, did you find it much easier to just like do the audition and then go about your day?
Yes, I had no choice, right? Because I literally had to jump on a train. So I was like, we're gonna submit something because it's worse to not submit. But when I did say no, I just remember the reaction I got. Like they're like, you should probably do it. I'm sorry, I lost the question. Like now I'm the one rambling. What was the question?
It's okay. It's a podcast. I welcome the ramble. Just
um,
initially question was, did you find that you taking that pressure off, the fact that you sort of had to rush it and that you put it out of your mind so quickly, that like, were you surprised when you got, because you said that you
oh
didn't see
yeah,
yourself
it
in this
was.
role, so getting that call of the
Yeah,
callback.
I spend I know you spend so much time on self tapes generally, right? And you're like, for me, I'm obsessive too about it. So it'll be in your brain for 3 days, and then you have to give yourself enough time for it to sink into the body. Then you're
Yeah.
like, okay, I'm ready to tape. Then you do 3,000 takes, and you're like, oh, one of these will work, and you blinked weird in one. So, but this one, I literally, it was just like, I was like, it is what it is,
Mm.
and there's nothing I can do about it, which is probably why it was better, because it wasn't, I didn't overthink it.
Yeah.
Personally, I thought it was awful. Like I did, because I didn't put as much time and energy as I normally do. So personally, that meant to me that it was a failure. But you know what? Maybe I should put less time and energy into all the other ones. We'll see.
Yeah. I mean, we're always our own worst critics. So like you said, like, oh, I blinked weird in that. That one's garbage. We're not going to do that one. But it's like, well, maybe that's never know. Maybe that's a little
They don't
quirk that
care
they
at
were
all.
looking
The
for.
kids don't notice at all. They're like,
Yeah.
they love it, right? So
Right.
it's so funny how hard we are on ourselves and in this industry.
Yeah. And sort of speaking on that, with the name of our show being Actors with Issues, we always sort of touch on career obstacles, hurdles that our guests have overcome. So, what comes to mind as something that you can shed some light on for our audience?
Man, a couple of
A
things, I
loaded
guess.
question, I know.
Yeah, that's a loaded question. I'm gonna need 15 minutes. I'm just kidding. I would say probably the gay hurdle is a big one, and not necessarily that the industry wouldn't hire me because I was gay, but I think in my head that's how I felt, and that might have been a
Mm.
reason that I felt held back, because I was like, oh, they're just gonna give it to, you know, the straight person. They're just gonna do this, but like maybe that was all me, but I'm a big enough hurdle for myself, so I would say like it's pretty hard, right? But another big one would be being Canadian, right? So um, we're often just like playing the servers or the baristas or the cops in all the American television shows up here. So it's really really hard to cross that line and get a large role, especially on an American show that has an audience. So we often have to go get a visa and then move to the States. Like the saying here is like, if you want to work in Toronto, you have to move to LA, which is insane. But it's almost like the casting directors see you as more legit if you move away, and then they're more likely to hire you, which I think will change now that we have so many productions up here.
Mm.
Um, but the opportunity is a lot less, I would say, for Canadian actors. And yeah, our union is it's great for us, but they don't necessarily always support the Canadian actors as much, because they just want everything shot up here, right?
Right.
So the rules of having to have so many Canadian actors on set and all that stuff, you can break those rules if you audition everyone, but you couldn't find the person you're looking for in Canada, right? And then they can hire from LA or New York or Atlanta or wherever. But oftentimes they'll just audition and then throw the tapes out, and that way, because the producers already had a character or an actor for that role.
Yeah.
But maybe that's an everywhere thing. But our I've even heard it from people who work for the union are kind of like, yeah, we know this goes on, but like we can't really do anything about it. We need these productions up here, you know. So
Yeah.
that one's been a big hurdle, I would say, here. But hey, if you try hard enough or not try enough, I guess in my my case with the Glamorous audition, I guess you could break the glass ceiling, which is nice.
Yeah. It is a bit frustrating. I mean, I live in New York, so they have, like, all the major casting, all the major networks have an HQ here. But I've heard from friends who live in Atlanta or in Albuquerque that the particular roles that are local hires are those smaller roles, like you said, sort of the day players, the barista, the cop, as you said. So yeah, I totally get that, sort of being a hurdle, and it's actually not something that many of our guests have talked about, because lots of our
Oh yeah,
guests are American, so they've never dealt with that.
yeah.
Or This is one actor in particular. He hasn't been on the show, but Nick Dodani, he was in the Murphy Brown reboot a few years ago,
Okay.
Dear Evan
Yeah.
Hansen. He
Oh,
was in New
amazing.
York for years doing a stand-up. He has a stand-up, an actor, and then moved to LA, and within 2 months he booked a series regular job in New York. So he had to get out just to come right
Yeah,
back.
that's exactly how it goes. Like series regular, when you see a series regular and a Canadian breakdown, like our entire industry just goes, oh well, we're not gonna book it, so it doesn't matter, which is wild. We shouldn't be thinking that way, right?
Yeah.
Um, but I mean, I guess it's everywhere. I guess it's not just Canada, but that is one of the biggest complaints I would say with my fellow actors, the actors I know too. It's like we're it's Canada's not the epicenter for this, right? It's America. You guys created fame basically, right? Like LA created stars, and
Yeah.
we don't have much of a star system here, so it's not easy to push these names unless you go to LA and try to make yourself a star there or someone known. But that is definitely the hardest thing I would say. Um, and universal here, we could kind of all feel collectively the same way. Well, not everybody, but most people I know feel the same way.
It's interesting with certain shows will break out from Canada, but only when they're picked up by like a US distributor and network, as you said. I'm currently rewatching Schitt's Creek. That's the first one that pops to
Oh,
mind, is that it blew up on Netflix, on Pop TV, and
yeah,
but yeah, those CBC or Kim's Convenience, same thing, sort of a CBC
Kim's
an
Convenience.
original, and then it breaks out once it gets moved to another sort of platform. But
Yeah,
yeah,
yeah, it's tough because the pay scale here is also like nothing close, right? I don't know so much about the like the day players and guest stars and stuff like that, but like it's not anywhere near what Americans get paid generally.
mm,
Um, so when an American show comes up and you're working on this show, like it's there's a huge difference in
mm.
how you're being paid. But if you move to LA or you move to New York or whatever, and then you come work in Canada again, they're like, oh, we actually do have more of a budget. Then you're like,
Like,
oh,
oh,
okay.
magically.
Magically we can pay you more. So I get it. Like I understand, and
Yeah.
I mean, I'm going through the visa process right now because I'd like to expand. Not that I don't think I can here, but I just need, somewhere fresh would be nice, and then
Mhm.
just be feel like feel new somewhere, and alive, and get to know people again, right?
Yeah.
At a different level, I guess, than I was a year ago. So
Yeah. And you're being proactive. And that's great. That's exactly what, all actors have to have, that sort of drive, and not just be like, I'll just wait here till the phone rings. It's like, or you can,
yeah,
get ahead of the curve. So that's great that you're doing that,
yeah,
especially off of, Glamorous. And yeah, and I'm also curious, lots of young actors will, whenever we post, like, what questions do you want us to ask? A lot of them ask about sort of how to get that first agent or manager that can help them get the ball rolling in their career, because lots of times you finish a BFA program or a conservatory, and not all those programs have showcases, so you're kind of just sent out into the world, and you're like, well, now what?
yeah.
So
It's like, go try it. And you're like,
yeah,
what do I
like, okay, Hollywood, I'm ready. And it's like, that's not really how it works.
do?
It's hard to
Yeah,
get discovered these days. It's not like back in the day. You just show up to the Warner Brothers lot and say, hello, here's my headshot.
give me a job. No,
So in your
no.
experience, what advice do you have for actors who maybe feel a little bit stuck because they don't have that first rep who can help them get things started?
That is tough. I started like a long time ago. Like I know I look really young, but I'm not. So when I went to musical theater school, and then
Mm,
I was able to like we had the showcase, but I had my singing teacher there had reached out to her agent before the showcase. I had already signed with somebody prior,
mm,
and then when I wanted to switch into film and TV, whether it was just like young people delusion, I was like, oh, anybody will take me kind of thing, right? And you just start small, like um, don't go for the top agents, just
right.
don't, not at the beginning, right? Even if they do bring you in, if you're not prepared enough, then it's going to be a bad experience. And I went through something like that. So um, find an agent that you love, and find an agency that doesn't have a lot of you on their roster, like a lot of your type. But also like take your time.
Mm,
Everybody thinks it has to be done right now, but it really doesn't. If you want a really long career, like there's so much time for success. So do the work, take some classes, talk to people. It's usually connections that'll get you with an agent. And hey, if you are desperate, just walk up to an agency with your headshot and be ready to belt defying gravity. So,
mm. So before we go, we always love to end with this question. In 10 words or less, what advice would you give to a young actor?
Um, take your time and find the joy.
Awesome. Well, Graham, thank you so much for taking the time to chat with us today and for talking about the issues. Really appreciate it.
Thank you so much.
Thanks for joining us. Be sure to subscribe to Actors with Issues on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you get your podcasts, and visit our YouTube channel for full video interviews. Actors with Issues is executive produced and hosted by Juan Ayala. See you next time.